I'm Renee Barrio, Head of Curatorial Affairs here at the McNay Art Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our conversation with Thomas Stokes, who's participating in our Artists Looking at Art series. Welcome, Thomas. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to welcome you as the second artist to participate in our 2019 Artists Looking at Art series. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited by the work you're presenting. And I thought I'd just I usually start these conversations asking a little about your background, your biography, where you're from, where you went to school, that sort of thing. So let's just talk about your background first.
Sure. Well, I've been making art for as long as I can remember. I took many art classes throughout elementary, middle school, and high school.
Where was that? Here in San Antonio?
Yes. Born and raised in San Antonio.
Okay.
Took one art class in college, but as for the rest, I'm mostly self-taught.
Was that a choice? Did you feel that you could do better sort of teaching yourself, or?
Yes, and I also kind of got tired of painting or drawing things for class assignments. I sort of wanted to do my own thing.
Sure.
And looking online, I found a lot of material that I couldn't find in the classroom.
What kind of material?
Anatomy books, things on the human body, stuff like that.
And so technique, you taught yourself how to use the materials, right? The paint and handle paint and
yes,
and that sort of thing.
I mostly work in acrylics.
Okay.
So that was quite a learning process, but I've gotten better with it and more comfortable with it over time.
And why did you choose acrylic?
It was the first thing I had access to. And at the time I thought oils were more expensive, so I worked with acrylic, and I've mostly stuck with that.
And so the work you're presenting here are portraits. Have you always been interested in sort of the human form and especially the portrait?
Yes. In high school I was doing, I guess what you could call hyper-realistic portraits.
Hyper-realistic?
But I got tired of doing that, and so I began to experiment, and that's where I am now. Okay.
So when you were doing these hyper-realistic portraits, were they people you knew, or were they of real people?
Yes, particularly of classmates for assignments, things like that. So they were done in graphite on paper, and I think it was for some extracurricular art thing, but yeah, that's what it was for.
And then so the work we're showing has a little more abstraction involved, right? And it's a very particular kind of way you're making the portraits that are very, very compelling. And it has, for me, it has both kind of this abstract kind of feel, but it also has this very psychological kind of feel to it. Are the portraits that you're showing here, are those also of real individuals, or are they portraits of people you know?
No, they're mostly from imagination. But I do look at some reference images for particular facial expressions or poses.
Like in photographs?
Yes, but the figures themselves are mostly from imagination.
Except you do have a few self-portraits.
Yes.
And when you're painting self-portraits, are you painting those from like looking in a mirror? I mean, looking at yourself, or looking at photographs, or are those again kind of invented as self-portraits?
They're mostly invented. I almost never look at the mirror when doing them, or at photographs. It's just from, I guess, my mental image of myself at times, and that's what makes them.
And you're relatively young in your art career, right? So as you were you said you were participating in art throughout elementary and high school. Were you looking at the work of other artists at the time, and are you who did you look at, and who do you look at now?
Oh, sure. I can't remember what particular artist I looked at the time, but since then I've studied various different painters such as Picasso, George Condo, Francis Bacon, and other abstract painters, because I've been getting a lot of inspiration from that recently. Some of those include post-war abstract expressionists and the way they handle paint.
Right.
But yeah, those are a few of the artists that I've studied.
The scale of the works is very intimate. So sometimes portrait painters or portrait artists create their portraits sort of in life scale, right? And they're in the same scale as in human life, or sometimes bigger. And yours are more kind of, they're small and they're kind of delicate. And is that scale issue, is that a practical issue, or is it something that you're interested in making these more kind of intimate portraits?
It was something that was very intentional at first. Something about working in that space, that small scale, was easier for me. I felt like I could have a little bit more control with the paint, and I could get an easier sense of the composition. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like, yeah, that makes it more intimate.
Mm-hmm. And in many cases, the palette's very limited. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is your relationship to color?
I'm always fascinated by color. For the limited palette paintings, the inspiration for those came from archival fashion pages and catalogs.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for brands such as Prada, Maison Margiela, Comme des Garçons. Because I looked at the palettes and I noticed they were limited as well and sort of vintage.
And muted?
Mm-hmm, muted, yeah.
And these are all designers who are designing way before you. Mm-hmm. So you're looking kind of, it's a little bit of a memory thing and nostalgic.
Yeah, I find the colors calming for some reason. Mm-hmm. So that's where the inspiration from those came from.
So that's really interesting to me because the images aren't dealing with those. Right. So you're pulling the palette from this kind of fashion photography, but the imagery is in a whole different kind of world. Mm-hmm. One of the, you work here at the McNay, mm-hmm. right? And you're on our security staff.
Right.
So you're around artwork all day, mm-hmm. right? And how has that influenced you? Do you feel like that has influenced your work?
Yes, it has. I've really been wanting to get into large scale paintings. And so that's been one of my motivators for large-scale paintings, because I feel like they have more of a presence when in a gallery space.
What scale are you thinking about?
I have some 30 by 30 inch mm-hmm. canvases that I haven't begun working on, but due to the current space that I'm working in. Mm-hmm.
Do you work at home? Is your studio at home?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's about the largest size canvas that I am looking to work on, but I would like to have massive paintings.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed for the most part, the portraits that we're showing are it's a single figure. Mm-hmm. In maybe a few cases there might be multiple views of the same figure, or maybe a couple with multiple figures.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's something about this, I read this kind of sense of isolation in the figure by themselves. Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little about that?
For each of those, I wanted to have one figure on
mm-hmm.
the painting and have that empty or negative space mm-hmm. behind the figure, but I sort of wanted them to feel like a captured moment of whatever I was painting.
And that's interesting you brought up the kind of empty space, because they all kind of exist in a void, right? We don't mm-hmm. know, you don't place them in any situation. They're just in this kind of, unidentified space.
Right. And like for the ones with black backgrounds, I feel like the void aspect is emphasized. And with each of those, I treat the black backgrounds almost as much as I would with the figure, meaning that I put a lot of work into getting it into a state which I feel comfortable in. Mm-hmm. So reworking the paint, adding different layers. So things like that.
Do you work on multiple paintings at one time, or do you kind of focus on one portrait?
Sometimes I'll work on multiple. If one is mostly complete, I will start another one mm-hmm. and then come back to it the next day to make revisions to it. Mm-hmm. But I mostly like to focus on one piece at mm-hmm. a time. Mm-hmm.
So have you had much opportunity to show your work publicly?
For my paintings, there was one previous event that I attended in Houston. Mm-hmm. It was a group show at a tattoo shop. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty fun, but there weren't any previous showings mm-hmm. that I participated in.
So what does it feel like to have your work shown at a museum?
Oh, it's great. I remember on installation day, I felt like I was in a dream, like it didn't feel real to me. but I'm very happy with it and very proud about it.
Yeah, and the feedback's been great. Do you feel like because of sort of the work being on the wall in the museum and having it up for a while and people seeing it, do you sense things might change in the way you approach? I mean, as it evolve, maybe you're going to take a different, like you mentioned, scale was one thing you wanted to increase. Are there other things that you kind of feel like seeing the work like on the wall?
Maybe adding more to the composition for each painting. Again, painting on larger scale. And maybe changing some of the color palettes and maybe where the figures are placed within each painting.
You mentioned that you were doing a lot of work in, I guess, drawing in high school, this hyper-realistic kind of drawing. Do you still make drawings, or now do you focus primarily on painting?
I still make drawings. They're in a little bit of a different style than the paintings. I don't know how to describe them, but...
portraits, though, not necessarily.
Right. Yeah, I guess you could call them portraits. They have a repetition of facial features, and I'm not sure what to call them. Yeah, and they're all pretty small scale. They're on large paper, but the drawings are quite small, where I focus on the detail and the shading and stuff like that.
Nice. Is there anything else that you feel like you want the audience to know about the work or about you?
I like to leave it, about the work, I like to leave it open to interpretation.
Remind me about the titles. Do you title them?
Yes. Well, the two are titled Self-Portrait, and the one with the screaming woman is titled Disorder. And those are part of a series that I'm working on. And the current title for that series is Disorder as well. But for the rest, those are in their own series. But yeah, I like to leave them open to interpretation. I don't like really forcing a narrative.
Sure. Although giving them titles like you do does hint at some story or some concept.
That's true.
You know, that you're kind of giving your audience a little bit of a window.
Though I think it's better than leaving every single one untitled.
Right. Well, thank you. We really appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us. And again, it's great to have your work here at the McNay.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome.